inspired or reminded because of the recent IPCC special report. The report makes it clear that the impact of climate change is happening now. We know that, we've seen the news reports, the hurricanes, the flooding, the heat waves, and I think the complexity of the impact is beginning to sink in. So our three speakers, Professor John Barry, Casey Aspin and James Orr, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and just let them say their pieces now.
Okay. Thank you, Jenny and Maurice, and the invitation to come, and you all for coming out. I'm John Barry, half professor, half hobbit, all cyclist, and I'm going to talk to you not about the usual things that climate breakdown, and I'm of the view, and I agree, for those who perhaps read George Monbiot, the Guardian journalist, who said we should stop talking about climate change. It's climate breakdown. We are treating the Earth's atmosphere as an open sewer, and as a result we're causing major changes. So I'm going to talk as much as I can about climate breakdown. But really I'm here to, partly inspired, some of us went to see Mary Robinson, the former Irish President, former UN Commissioner for Refugees, who launched her book called Climate Justice on Monday as part of the International Belfast Festival. And she talked a lot about stories, of individual stories, and I'm going to try my best to try and basically tell my story in three parts, which to me all interlink. One is as a father, and part of my concern around climate breakdown is my sense of growing foreboding and of opportunities lost for my children, and if I'm lucky enough, grandchildren. The second one is then as an academic, talking about some of my own writings and research on climate breakdown, and for me the inevitable transition to a low carbon future. To me it's up there now with death and taxes. It is inevitable. My only concern is how quickly and what are the opportunities that we lose if we delay the transition. For me, climate breakdown, yes, there are identifiable corporations and powerful interests that we can point to, but as my father, who's a wise peasant from County Wicklow, he always used to say, when you point the finger, there's three back at you. So there's all that issue. I think we're all bifurcated, we're all divided in our responsibility in terms of responding to climate breakdown. I would say, though, that the responsibility for climate breakdown is not evenly distributed globally. It seems to me there's a global injustice that the very people who are most vulnerable to climate change are the ones who've done least to contribute to it, and they benefit least from a fossil fuel-based economic system. We don't need any more reports. Even the recent IPCC one that Jenny mentioned, it's raining reports. In fact, we don't even need new technology. We have all the technologies we need to make a transition to a renewable, clean energy economy. So why don't we act? Will we be the first species to accurately document our own demise? We've known about this for a number of decades. The issue to me is political will and sources of hope. My source of hope is that communities coming together, talking about this issue, being honest about our fears and our hopes, because this is not just an abstract, scientific, technologically induced existential dilemma. It's actually deeply a moral issue. What type of people are we? When we have all the knowledge that we are, by our ways of life, by our high carbon ways of life, by our excessive flying, excessive meat eating and so on, all of these things we know, where is the will? And I think the will has to come not from individuals, so not the individualised responsibility. That's very immobilising. Where it's our fault. These are structural problems of the way the economy is organised. Why can't we organise, as Matt would know, free public transportation in our cities as a solution? In the same way with free Wi-Fi. We know these deliver economic and social benefits, that it's worth the state or the local council to pay that money out. But why can't we say these are the forms of responses, imaginative responses, to meet our needs in low carbon ways? But rather than seeing it as a problem to fix, I would also say, what is climate doing for us? Is it not affording us an opportunity to rethink the good life, rethink our perhaps cultivated, habituated, mainstream views of the good society, of a life, and I'll put it very simply, of a life of consumer luxury, of basically whoever dies with the most shit wins. Buying crap you don't need to impress people you don't care about. In the run-up to Christmas, just watch how this orgy of consumerism, of often people getting into debt, another issue as well, can we not see that in addressing the climate crisis, that we can open up the possibility of rethinking what is a good life in the 21st century, or what's sometimes called the Anthropocene, a new buzzword that's coming around, the age of the human, as a result of climate change. And can we actually rethink our economic model in a way that lifts people out of poverty, so that we don't have the abomination that we have right here in this community, that on a cold winter's night people have to face the awful situation of feed themselves or heat themselves. Can we not figure a way in which addressing the climate crisis, creating a low carbon green economy to lift people out of poverty, so they don't have to face that particular awful dilemma? But we've seen how a combination of activism, yes, through the political system, representatives, but also, in my view, we're going to need a lot more social mobilisation around this. The normal functions and levers of governments ain't going to do it. We certainly need, as I say, to pack our centres of decision making with Greens and those who get this agenda, but we're also going to need citizens to back those up. And I think that slavery, the anti-abolition movement, gives us some inspiration, or the suffragettes. Power and an incumbent dominant system does not concede anything without struggle. There is no app for this. There is no easy technological solution, although, as I say, we're going to need technology. We're going to need political mobilisation and citizens who are educated on the issue, who know about it and are concerned about it and are motivated. It could even be motivated by a faith position. You know, for me, and I speak now not just as a lapsed Catholic, but a completely collapsed one, there are a lot of good resources in various religious traditions. Ask yourself, what would Jesus drive? I think you'd be like me, Galen, and a couple of others, cycling. How can you profess to be a good Christian and care about stewardship and God's creation if you're driving half a mile to church every Sunday? When you're driving and living an unsustainable lifestyle, surely it honours your God and His creation, or her creation, depending on one's view, by actually adopting a low-carbon lifestyle. So I do think a part of the climate narrative has to attach itself to other pre-existing narratives. A purely scientific analysis will not mobilise people. And I speak from experience as a recovering politician of 7 years. Climate change had no traction in the communities I represented in Hollywood and Clandeboy, which were a combination of, yes, affluent, but also working class communities. When I talked about energy, jobs in the green, renewable energy economy, talking about, particularly in this community here, of the traditions and the communities built around a industrial Harlem Wolf, Shorts and Mackeys. We have the engineering traditions here. So can we not see that actually East Belfast, of all the places in Northern Ireland, is a place for this new industrial revolution, to be actually creating non-outsourceable jobs, in retrofitting our homes. Some of the solutions to the climate breakdown problem aren't high-tech. We have the worst levels of fuel poverty in Europe. 42% of families in Northern Ireland live in fuel poverty. That means they're spending more than 10% of their income simply on heating their homes. It's a combination of oil dependence, because we're importing lots of oil that can fluctuate in price, but also because of really badly insulated houses. So a climate response is actually creating non-outsourceable jobs in a context of a construction sector that still hasn't recovered from the crisis of 10 years ago. It's about reducing our CO2 emissions and actually seeing that we have abundant sources of renewable energy. You know, we live on an island. You know, Galen would know more than me, but I've seen wind maps of the wind resource from the Outer Hebrides to Galway Bay, we have some of the most consistent offshore wind on the planet. Why aren't we having the ambition that Scotland had to be the Saudi Arabia of wind energy? There's an absolute poverty of ambition politically here around the vision of creating jobs for people that gets us beyond, at least partly, our usual sectarian stuff. And to me, that is the hope and indeed the optimism I have for how we can deal with this particular issue. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. And I'd just like to end on a concept that I think is really important to understand in addressing the climate breakdown problem, and it is called a just transition. Now, what a just transition means is that we cannot make a transition, these decades long, the planning, the coordination of moving beyond a carbon-based economy by making other people poorer or being worse off. So, for example, if we have a carbon tax, which many people say we need to reduce carbon emissions, that will hurt necessarily more people on low income. That's an unjust transition. So we've got to put in mitigating policies to ensure that nobody is negatively impacted by this transition to a low carbon economy. We've also got to not be completely negative about the carbon-based economy that's got us where we are. We need to honour fossil fuels for what they've done for us. They have created a lot of good things, but they have now simply passed the point where they are a net benefit to society locally or indeed globally. So not to be slagging off coal miners or people in the oil industry, because I think that gets the labour movement their backs up and obviously communities. We need to find ways of retraining people in a low carbon economy. That's what a just transition is around. And in that context, in a just transition, and also echoing the idea of reframing climate change as climate breakdown, we need to also stop talking about fossil fuels. They are fossil resources. One of the uses of these resources is to burn them for energy. We have so many other great things we can use with coal, oil and gas. Maybe less so with coal, but certainly with oil and gas. So again, it's about honouring the fossil fuel system, which has brought us this far, but say we've now passed the threshold, we're moving on to something new. But it's also about seeing that the fossil resources that are there, they have to be kept in the ground. 2/3 of the available coal, oil and gas in the planet's crust has to stay in the ground to keep us with an 80% chance of staying below 2 degrees. That's why we need to keep the coal in the hole, the oil in the soil, and the frack in the crack. Thank you.